I mean, I think that precisely what we're going through right now with coronavirus is going to force us to address, like, how do we want kids to be spending their time during the day? In the past, it was just automatic. It was, well, you go to school at 8 o'clock and you have snack time at 10 and lunch and then recess. That's all out the window. And now we get to decide which way do we want to do it. As you look at your kids and their future, what do you hope gets added into the educational experience that maybe wasn't easy to do before coronavirus?
Yeah, there's a lot there I think about. My wife and I we homeschool, so we think deeply about like the learning environment.
You homeschooled before this all began.
I did. Yeah. So like when everyone was joining us in homeschooling, we were like, welcome aboard. It's a blast. And in homeschool, we talk about homeschool versus schooling outside the home and in public schools. And I actually believe in both. I think there's a role and a place for both. Oftentimes these ideas are pitted against each other in this zero-sum conversation, which I don't believe in. So there's a role for both. And actually, I think our kids will end up doing both. I think they'll be homeschooled for part of their schooling, and they'll be in a school outside the home for part of their education. But I bring up our kind of viewpoints about homeschooling because it kind of it arms and it supplies the answer to the question you asked, which is kind of what do I wish would get added? Well, there's a lot of elements of homeschooling that I hope do get added, to the out of homeschooling, public and private schools, where we kind of step back and be a bit more observant and come to a few realizations. Is one, that young kids are learning machines, right? We know the neuroscience shows it, social observation shows it. They were born to observe their environments, to learn. They naturally conduct tests, although we may never call them, tests, but they conduct experiments and get to answers very rapidly. And they do so in individual ways. So if we step back and learn and look at children as learning machines, we'll see, I think we'll restructure our schedule, right? And so homeschooling, I think a lot of parents do it because it provides flexibility. It's because it's not at scale, it's not as rigid as the public school day has to be. You said it yourself, you go at 8, the buses roll in, you go, to your first
you want to do something at scale, you got to standardize. And if you don't standardize, the only way around that is technology in some way. Well,
I think you just hit the nail on the head. Is we got to do it at scale. We must, because we've got to, have a learned society. We have to educate all our kids, but we also have to, and education is coming around to this. We have to recognize the individual different learning styles and habits and paces of different kids, and kind of respect their own natural ability to learn, and somehow find a way to do that at scale. And I think you're exactly right. I think technology is a part of it. It'll be uncomfortable. It'll force us to re-educate teachers. It'll change the way we run our teaching colleges, for sure. But I've no doubt that we can get there.
Yeah, you were right about coronavirus just making things happen faster, because what it does is it says, hey, the complaints that you were using or the reasons that you were using, now we've got other problems that are bigger than those resistances. And so you imagine we can't do lessons online because not everybody has access to Wi-Fi. Well, when all of a sudden no one can go to school, now the people that don't have access to Wi-Fi or don't have a way to get on the internet, we start trying to solve that problem. And it's really just the 20% maybe that don't have it, and then they can come on to the larger system. But the teaching system in the United States seems deeply entrenched in the way that they were doing it because it's been around for so long, right? It's probably the institution that's been around. The only one longer is probably the military. So making changes within the education industry is, I think, very, very difficult. Yeah.
Maybe that'll be the theme to my career, is going into deeply entrenched industries and challenging some of these norms or the way things. Maybe I should next industry I go into, I should I should do like an entrenchment measure and maybe go into a newer industry. But that really is the common theme. You know, you're exactly right. Education is deeply entrenched in a way that, you know, I kind of always thought, but I'm only realizing until you're up close. And you're just like, guys, we've got to come together and stress test all of these ideas that we hold to be so sacred, because the mission, we're all aligned on the mission. No one, there's no political party or faction that says, no one needs education. We don't need to learn basic skills.
Leave those guys behind. Don't worry about them. Let's just pass on them.
Yeah. No, you know, that's, you find the points of agreement and then you build from there, knowing that, you know, every idea or tenet that we have held should be stress tests. And some of them, you know, may in fact go away. But what you said about solving for, you know, the internet. So on the flip side, let's go back to the Osprey. A lot of us always thought, think of a world in which we didn't develop this technology, and perhaps our enemy did, or even maybe no one did develop this, you know, this hybrid aircraft. But then we would be sitting around a campfire dreaming like, man, what if we had this, you know, kind of helicopter thing that could land here, but then fly faster, right? We would actually, the thing we did with that helicopter is we actually saved more people than we sought to try to kill or harm, because what happens with battlefield injuries is you got this thing called the magic hour. It's the golden hour. It's the same thing as if you get in a car accident. It's why we place hospitals where we place them, and we have life flight and ambulances. Because if you get in the traumatic accident, and you have a traumatic injury, you know, here's Pareto's principle again. It doesn't unfold slowly. We've got a very limited amount of time to get you first aid care, and so that's what we use the Osprey for. Is to say we can now get you to a trauma center much further away, much faster. And so as I pull it forward to education, you know, look now that we're doing remote learning, or we're forced to do remote learning, not that we chose to, look at the problems we've unsurfaced. You know, we've unsurfaced the problems that there's a lot of kids that don't have access to broadband internet. You know, so that's the equivalent of basically saying you can't come to school. All the rest of you can. We're not even sending the school bus to your neighborhood. And so we're going to go and fix that broadband problem. And we will. We've got the infrastructure and the resources to do it, but it just makes you sit back and think, well, why do we even let that circumstance unfold in the first place? It was probably someone that said, we don't need broadband anywhere. You know, they've gotten along fine without it. These are the negative second and third order effects of when you don't take care of those kind of issues that are coming down the road.
Yeah, education is such a difficult one, because you think about one of the big complaints that people have. If you have a student that is excelling, but they're maybe not at the top end, they're doing better than most. They're maybe at the beginning of that 20%, and they look around and say, well, we're making all of these accommodations to bring along the slower people, but what's happening to my kid that's slightly above average? He actually, or she, gets nothing. And so you've got all of these weights pushing against the volume of people on one side of the distribution where they don't have access. And then you've got people that are getting great advantage and they're getting propelled forward. And then you've got this big swath in the middle that, like, maybe they aren't getting anything extra. Maybe they are being held back. I don't know. But when you're in the education space, it appears to me that you have all of the forces of that distribution pulling on one another.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, first, it's already going to be an emotionally charged debate because there's kids involved, right? And everyone wants the best for their kids, right? As we should. And as a society, I think we've got to get to the point where we want the best for all kids, right? Like I don't. Not only am I responsible for the education of my kids, but I'm responsible for the education of, you know, your kid once it's born, and my neighbor's kid. And that sounds kind of heavy and weighty, but it actually just makes economic and societal sense to have that belief system. But you're right, there's all these forces pulling, and for a lot of time, because education had to be done at scale, you kind of had to pick some place on that kind of curve to focus on. You know, do we focus on the advanced students that are running really fast? Well, most people say, well, we can't do that because then there's 80% of people. Okay, do we focus on the middle because that's where the most, you kind of get into this utilitarian philosophy. Let's do the most good for the most people. And that's kind of where education has been, is kind of that middle, that median, plus or minus the standard deviation. And then, of course, you have, the kids that seemingly are underperforming. So most of education is pointed at the middle, that middle part of the curve. And then you get the advent of like AP courses or gifted programs, because we got to do something with these kids. They're getting bored. Actually, they'll just cause more problems if we don't do something with them. And then, of course, you do have programs for the kids. Probably not enough programs, some may argue, for the kids that aren't they're underperforming seemingly. So that is kind of the fundamental problem, I think, with the way it's structured now. Education is, again, I'm very hopeful because it's slowly inching towards this phrase you'll keep hearing, which is individualized education or personalized. They're kind of interchangeable phrases. And a lot of states, their boards of education are getting on board with that to say, well, let's try to look at this a different way. Let's look at the kids that are underperforming. What we're finding is if you can design a curriculum meant for them, their learning styles, their current abilities, you actually will get a better outcome. And 5-10 years down the road, their performance will actually look very similar to the high achievers. They just needed a program that was tailored to them, again, because we know more about neuroscience, and we know that kids are just naturally learning machines. So that's where it's going. My hope is that COVID kind of speeds that up. I think it will. We're seeing individualization everywhere else. We're seeing it with Netflix, with Amazon. All of our services, particularly in consumerism and entertainment, are already getting there, mostly because of AI. And so we just have to pull that into the classroom and into education.
Yeah, and you juxtapose that against something like a term that I hear all the time, evidence-based medicine. And somebody pointed out to me that evidence-based medicine means that you're using statistics to decide what this one individual should have, instead of moving towards the personalized medicine, which is not using statistics. It's trying to use some combination of knowledge that we have and how other people respond, but what is going on specifically with you. And to think about this in terms of education, where, with medicine, you can just wait till the people get sick. But with education, it is, this person is young. We got to do it now. We can't wait to make a decision.